This week on Jerusalem Dateline, after Israel's fourth election, still no clear path to a stable government. The anti-Netanyahu camp still trying to topple the prime minister, but unlikely partners could be the key. We'll have analysis on what could lie ahead for Israel. Plus, Jewish hero Natan Sharansky on God's deliverance of the Jewish people on Purim and Passover, and its connection to Soviet Jewry today. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. The final votes have been counted, and once again, Israel does not have a clear path to a stable government. But the parties committed to topple Prime Minister Netanyahu are still trying to oust Israel's longest-running prime minister in history. The results of Israel's fourth election within 2 years look like the last three, with no clear winner. The parties aligned with Prime Minister Netanyahu total 52 seats. The parties committed against Netanyahu total 57 seats. Two parties are uncommitted. The right-wing party Yamina holds 7 seats. Ra'am, or the United Arab List, an Islamist party, has 4 seats. With those 4 seats, Ra'am may hold the key to who gets the 61 seats needed to form a coalition. Its leader, Mansour Abbas, wants any government in power to provide more support to Israeli Arabs. Making the path toward forming a new government even more complicated, some parties refuse to sit in a coalition with other parties. Once again, it puts Israel's politics in disarray.
Israel is experiencing its worst political crisis in decades. It's apparent that our political system finds it very difficult to produce a decisive outcome. This is as a result of inherent weaknesses in our electoral system, but it's also because of the Netanyahu factor. A very popular prime minister that wants to remain in power, although he was indicted, and Israelis are split right down the middle on this question.
Now parties are scrambling for support and defectors from other parties. Israel will begin the celebration of the Passover on Saturday evening. Some say Israel will need another miracle to deliver it from its political plight. Joining me now to discuss what lies ahead for Israel's government are CBN senior editor John Wagi and Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl. John, first to you. You know, some people have described what's going on right now in Israel like a political Rubik's Cube. Tell me, what do you think is next?
I think next is a lot of horse trading and a lot of confusion, all set against the backdrop of a Passover celebration that I think Israelis have been waiting for a long time. I think this is just the opening kickoff, and it's happening right before a week of Passover celebrations. So it's a lot going on behind the scenes, probably some quiet in the media, which will be beneficial to Israelis, but it's going to be a fast and furious trading frenzy behind the scenes.
Yeah, Julie, tell me what have Israelis been facing lately, and do you see the possibility of a fifth election?
Well, you know, Chris, like John said, Israelis are heading into Passover. So right in the middle of this week, we had this massive dust storm just as everybody's cleaning their houses before Passover. And we had a time change and we had elections. So we had like plenty of things going on this week, you know, and on election day, I had more than one person tell me right after they had voted, yeah, we're going to fifth elections. So I think, and kind of laughing about it, but, you know, I think Israelis it's kind of their nature to just keep going forward. But I think people are pretty weary of this. They're a bit disturbed. We had lower voter turnout. Maybe that was because of the coronavirus, but, you know, people, I think they're a little bit discouraged and don't really see what the way forward is.
Yeah, Julie, I talked to some Israelis too, and they're saying the same thing about fifth election. John, go a little deeper into the machinations between many of these parties, like will serve with who, or who will sit with who. Talk us about that.
Right. Well, first of all, you could have a right-wing bloc formed next week if people would just reconsider their pledges that they went during the campaign. Remember, Gidon Saar, whose party I believe ended up with 6 seats, signed a contract on Israeli television saying he would not serve with Netanyahu. If he hadn't done that, if you remember a year ago, Sar was one of the first people into the building at Likud headquarters on election night. We were all there and we were marveling that there's Gideon Sar, so there is a possibility for a combination of Sar's party and Yamina and Likud, and they could do it without the Arab bloc and form a solid right-wing bloc. But it doesn't look like it's going to happen because Sar's gone too far out on a limb. But what about his party members? What if the New Hope Party were to kind of split up? What if Benny Gantz, as defense minister again, would join Likud? What if the Joint Arab List, which would have been unheard of years ago, what if a couple members of the Joint Arab List, which we understand Likud members have reached out to them, said, we'll split away from Joint Arab List and take part in a Netanyahu government. So you have lots of Netanyahu possibilities. And then the center-left coalition is asking people like Naftali Bennett to join them. And so, it's going to be, like I said before, fast and furious trading during the Passover and the days beyond that.
Well, it is the time of Passover, and many Jews around the world are going to be thanking God for the deliverance from Egypt. And right now they're praying, I'm sure, for deliverance from this political plight. Julie and John, first of all, to you, Julie, how can people be praying about what's going on in Israel right now?
Well, I think really it's important to pray that God will make a way where there doesn't seem to be a way. Even if Israelis went to a fifth election, it's like there's no way out. It's just like doesn't seem to be a way forward. I would also say pray for humility. I know, in the beginning they said Netanyahu should just humble himself and ask Gideon Sar to come back. And Gideon Sar tweeted today that he should, Netanyahu should humble himself and for the good of the country step down. So, but people need to humble themselves, not the other person. So I think that's also a big thing. And really that, Israelis won't be discouraged, that we won't have any kind of rebellion on our hands. And this constant strife would really be put to rest.
Yeah. John, what do you think?
I would echo everything Julie said. And I would just say, if the leaders could look up, if they could look toward the God that gave them Israel in the first place, that said he would be with them. And in doing that, it's another thing that Julie mentioned, doing things for the good of the nation. There's been such a fight over the current prime minister, over Netanyahu. And if they could just look to other issues, the threats from Iran, the things that unite Israelis more than the political infighting. I know that's a tall order, but it's something we can all be praying for anyway.
Coming up, just like God delivered the Jewish people on Passover and Purim, he's doing the same today. Ahead of the Passover holiday, CBN News sat down with famous Soviet refusenik Natan Sharansky. His emigration from the former Soviet Union to Israel in 1986 paved the way for the exodus of 2 million Soviet Jews. He told CBN News about how God miraculously delivered the Jewish people in and from the former Soviet Union, just like on Purim and Passover.
Natan Sharansky, welcome to Jerusalem Dateline. We're now between two important Jewish holidays when the Jewish people were saved. Purim and Passover. What's the significance of that in this?
In Agadah, it is said that in every generation there are people who raise against us. Or the idea of Seder Pesach, of celebration, is to remind that the challenges are the same and to remind ourselves about the power of our people when we are guided by God. So I think we are lucky to be in the generation which went through the miracle of Purim and through powerful liberation of Exodus from Egypt. I was 5 years old when Stalin died, and my father explained to me that it's a great day for us, for Jews. I should remember all my life that miracle happened, we are saved. He didn't tell me that that is the day of Purim. Even if he told me, I was absolutely assimilated. We grew disconnected from anything Jewish. But that was the day of Purim. And Stalin died while planning the biggest massacre of Jewish people after Holocaust. The leading Jewish Soviet doctors were already arrested. They were tortured. They were accused in poisoning the leaders of the Soviet Union. Their trial and public execution was planned on Pesach, what means months after Purim. It had to bring to a lot of anger and pogroms. There was already prepared the letter of Russian Jewish leaders to Stalin, asking him to save Jewish people from the justified anger of Russian people. And then hundreds of thousands of Jews had to be taken from Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, and other places and sent to Siberia. And it was planned that at least 1/3 of them will die already on their way there. And then Purim came and Stalin died. So everybody who knows the story of Purim can understand the power of this comparison. And I go to kindergarten and I do what father told me, what everybody does. Everybody is crying about Stalin and I'm crying. We are singing songs about the son of all the people, Stalin, and I'm also singing. And I have no idea how many children are really crying or how many of them are crying exactly as I, because we know that it's very good that Stalin died. So that was the beginning of my life of loyal Soviet citizen, of doublethink, when you know that all the life around you, it's all lies. But the truth can be only kept for your family and for your people. And you're not fighting for anything because there are no values except the value of survival.
That wasn't the end of the story for Sharansky, Soviet Jewry, or Jews around the world. There were other miracles in the works.
And then later, after 1967, when Israel entered our lives, and you understand that all the world looks on you and says, how you guys did it. The world connects me to Israel. You don't understand this connection. And in the underground, we start reading the books which were brought by Jewish tourists from abroad about Exodus from Egypt. And suddenly you realize that your history doesn't begin from Bolshevik Revolution, from 1917, but your history, if you decide that that is your history, starts from Exodus from Egypt, and it continues through thousands of years. And there are people who say we are family, Jews all over the world. And there is state of Israel which is ready to send airplanes to the end of the world to bring in freedom. That's when you find strength to start fighting for your rights, for rights of other Jews, and for the freedom. And that's how you became activist of Zionist movement and the human rights movement in the Soviet Union.
Sharansky became known as a refusnik, a Jew who was refused permission to leave the Soviet Union and immigrate to Israel. Sentenced to 14 years, he served 9, largely for spreading truth about human rights abuses in the Soviet Union.
I came 10 years after I was released from prison to Soviet Union as a minister of Israel. And I insisted that I will visit not only official meetings of the ministers, but also KGB prison, where I spent 1.5 years of interrogation. And they took my wife there. And when asked by the journalists, why are you doing it? Isn't it painful? I said, to the contrary, only think, that was the most powerful empire of our times. It controlled 1/3 of the world. KGB was the most sinister, most dangerous secret police in the world. And the leaders of KGB are explaining me that everything is finished. All the Jewish activists are arrested. The world is afraid to mention our names. I knew that it's a lie, but I was absolutely isolated. Now, Soviet Union doesn't exist. KGB doesn't exist. 2 million Jews left Soviet Union. More than 1 million lives in Israel. And all the world is a different place. And that all comes when we go back to our identity, to our values, when we hear the voice of God, and when we're united in this struggle. So miracles of Purim and definitely miracles of Exodus from Egypt happened in our generation.
Up next, CBN News discusses the humanitarian crisis in Yemen and what's being done to help the Yemeni people. In Yemen, a humanitarian crisis is getting worse as regional players discuss ways to end the conflict. The fighting on the tip of the Saudi peninsula continues to escalate. This as Riyadh offers an incentive to try to end the fighting, which would include a nationwide ceasefire between Iranian-backed rebel Houthis and the Yemeni government. The fighting is forcing hundreds of thousands of people from their homes. Many of the displaced are cut off from food, water, and other daily needs by the fighting. CBN senior international correspondent George Thomas spoke with the head of the World Food Program, who told him that millions could be at risk in the coming months.
You have described what's happening today in Yemen as catastrophic. You just got back from the country. Tell us the situation there.
George, it really is catastrophic. I mean, 6 years of war just destroying the innocent victims of this conflict. It was just atrocious. It's hard to believe that that's happening in the modern world today.
What do you mean when you say the situation is totally man-made?
It's not a natural disaster. It's nothing but conflict in the worst way possible. And so after 6 years of war, this is a nation of 29, 30 million people. 16 million people don't know where the next meal is coming from. We feed about 13 million, and out of that, 5 million of them are knocking on the door of famine. Literally don't know if they're going to survive. We need about $160 million per month just to avoid famine. And we're running out of funds, and we're running out of fuel.
The UN Secretary General recently said that if you don't feed people, you feed conflict. Talk about the correlation between the two.
We can end hunger around the world. There's no doubt about it in my mind. So when you begin to look at what's happened in the last few years, we had 80 million people 4 years ago marching to the brink of starvation. Pre-COVID, that number had gone from 80 to 135. Post-COVID, that number is now 270 million. But the jump was based upon man-made conflict. And now compounded with COVID, you really have a hunger pandemic, famines of potential biblical proportions as we're facing right now in places like Yemen. And if we don't do something about it, you're going to have at least one of three things. You'll have famine, starvation. 2, you'll have destabilization of nations. 3, you'll have mass migration. And we have a simple solution for starvation. It's called food. When Jesus said, when you didn't do it to the least of me, these you didn't do it to me, I never really appreciated the breadth of what that meant in terms of loving your neighbor until I traveled from country to country to country and seeing the children, the image of God. It's heartbreaking to see this happening when it's primarily man-made, and we have a solution. And so with the wealth that we have, with all the successes of businesses and men and women around the world, we got to love our neighbor. And this is the time now to show that faith. No matter where you are, you can make a difference in the world today.
Up next, it's called the bread of affliction, and Jewish people eat it for a week as a reminder of God's deliverance from Egypt. Every year, Jewish people around the world celebrate the Exodus from Egypt with the Passover Seder. One of the key elements is unleavened bread, or matzah. And if a whole country eats matzah for a week, that's a lot of matzah. Take a look at how they make matzah in Israel. The Bible calls it the bread of affliction, unleavened bread, or matzah. Every year, the Jewish people are commanded to retell the story of their exodus from Egypt and to eat unleavened bread for 7 days.
Because the Lord made them live very fast, they had to make bread that didn't have time to rise, and they ate this flat bread, which is matzah.
Most Israelis take the commandment to eat unleavened bread very seriously, and many actually like it. Grocery stores like this one devote whole sections to it. And besides regular matzah, you can get egg, whole wheat, and even choco matzah.
The regular matzah must be made of flour and water only. The flour would look to you and like regular flour, but it's not regular flour.
Roy Wolf is vice president of Matzot Aviv. He told CBN News the whole process, from mixing to rolling to shaping to baking, must be finished in 18 minutes, because the moment water touches the flour, it starts rising.
In reality, our process is much, much faster. We want to be as efficient as possible, and the whole process takes no longer than 3-4 minutes. But every 15 minutes, in order to avoid to have any leftovers of leavened dough, we have to clean the mixer system.
Wolf is the 6th generation to work in his family's business, which started in 1887. They've been in the current factory since 1946.
In the basements here where we have the flour silos today, the Haganah, the first defense forces, used to hide the weapons from the British mandate. Since 1946 we've been here making matzah. Of course, the factory was refurbished several times.
At Matzot Aviv, they make about 20 tons of matzah per day. They start in October and work around the clock for the last month, except on the Sabbath, to provide matzah to Jewish communities in Israel and around the world.
We are exporting to over 35 countries, to all Jewish communities around the world. From the large communities in North America to even the smallest community. There's one person that's in Wallis Island. He's the doctor of the island, and we are sending him matzah every year. And so he will be able to have a seder with matzah from Israel. But we also have Christian communities buying matzah in countries like Korea and Singapore, where it's, I've been told that in some churches it's been used as the holy bread.
The Last Supper would have been a Passover Seder with unleavened bread. Because of that, many Christians like to take communion with matzah. Some even say that the design of the matzah, striped and pierced, is symbolic of the Messiah himself. You might think with all this matzah making that the Wolf family would get tired of Passover, but not so.
We're waiting for this Seder. We usually come very tired to the Seder because I'm working until the same day in the afternoon. But it means a lot. This holiday, of course, means a lot to us.
One Israeli compared matzah to a data drive, passing along information from generation to generation. The Passover has been celebrated now for thousands of years. And to all our Jewish friends, Hag Pesach Sameach. Happy Passover. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blasts so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time.